Come on, Morrison. You can't compete with an army of scraps.
What you call scrap, we call HONOR. Now go away!
Disabled Army mechanic fixed cars in garage, then built something that changed everything. The wrench slipped from Jake Morrison's left hand. For the third time that morning, his damaged fingers unable to maintain the grip that had once made him the finest heavy equipment mechanic in the 82nd Airborne. The IED blast outside Kandahar had shattered more than just his spine and left arm. It had destroyed his identity as someone whose hands could fix anything the Army could break. Now, hunched over Mrs. Patterson's stubborn carburetor in his cramped garage, behind his disabled veteran housing, Jake represented everything that bureaucrats feared about wounded warriors, damaged goods, struggling to find purpose in a civilian world that measured worth by what you could produce rather than what you'd sacrificed. But what the residents of Cedar Falls, Michigan didn't know was that their broke-down mechanic was quietly building something that would transform how American communities treated their veteran population. He fixed engines that wouldn't start, and before he was finished, he would fix lives that had stopped running long before the cars ever did. The sound of another veteran's pickup truck refusing to turn over would prove that some battles are fought with socket wrenches instead of rifles, and victory is measured in jobs created rather than enemies eliminated. Cedar Falls, Michigan, 2025. The former mill town of 8,500 residents had been slowly dying since the furniture factories closed 15 years earlier. Its downtown filled with empty storefronts, and its young people leaving for opportunities that no longer existed in communities built around industries that had moved overseas. The local VA clinic served 3 counties from a converted strip mall, its understaffed facilities struggling to provide basic services to veterans whose needs exceeded what bureaucratic medicine could address. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison had been the kind of soldier that the Army builds legends around a heavy equipment mechanic whose diagnostic abilities bordered on supernatural, whose repairs kept armored vehicles running in conditions that defeated factory engineers, and whose leadership under fire had earned him 2 Bronze Stars, and the kind of reputation that made commanders fight to get him assigned to their units. The explosion that ended his career had been routine by Afghan standards, and IED hidden beneath a disabled Humvee that he'd been trying to repair the blast that caught him in the open while he worked to get his convoy moving again. The injuries had been extensive, but not immediately life-threatening traumatic brain injury that affected his fine motor control spinal compression that left him with chronic pain and limited mobility, and nerve damage in his left arm that made precision work a daily struggle against his body's limitations. The medical discharge had been inevitable, but the transition to civilian life had been brutal in ways that military medicine couldn't address or understand. Jake's garage was a testament to adaptive engineering and stubborn determination, its tools modified to accommodate his physical limitations, while its layout maximized efficiency for someone whose mobility was compromised, but whose mechanical knowledge remained intact. The building itself was a converted 2-bay service station that he'd purchased with his disability settlement, its 1950s-era concrete floors and corrugated metal walls providing the kind of honest workspace that modern auto repair chains had abandoned in favor of computerized diagnostic bays and corporate efficiency. The community that surrounded him was filled with others whose lives had been disrupted by economic forces beyond their control. Laid-off factory workers whose skills had become obsolete single mothers juggling multiple jobs that didn't pay living wages, and elderly residents on fixed incomes who couldn't afford the repair costs that newer vehicles required. Jake's prices were fair to the point of charity. His work quality exceeded what customers could get at franchise shops, and his willingness to explain rather than exploit made him invaluable to neighbors who'd been taken advantage of by mechanics who prioritized profit over service. But what his customers didn't know was that Jake's mechanical work was subsidizing a much larger mission that had been developing since his first month in Cedar Falls. His garage had become an informal gathering place for area veterans drawn by word-of-mouth recommendations and the kind of understanding that only came from shared experience with military service and civilian transition challenges. The broader context was a veteran unemployment crisis that official statistics couldn't capture combat experienced soldiers whose skills didn't translate to civilian job requirements, whose disabilities made them liability concerns for employers who lacked understanding of military service, and whose pride prevented them from seeking help that felt like charity rather than opportunity. Jake's position as successful small business owner made him unusual among his veteran peers, but his disabilities and struggles made him credible in ways that government counselors and civilian social workers could never achieve. The collision between Jake's mechanical expertise and his growing awareness of veteran employment challenges was building towards something that would transform not just individual lives, but entire community approaches to supporting those who'd served in uniform while creating economic opportunities that benefited everyone involved. The turning point came on a Tuesday morning when Marine veteran Carlos Rodriguez pushed his dead pickup truck into Jake's garage with a kind of grim determination that marked someone fighting battles that civilian eyes couldn't see. The truck's engine problems were obvious, a blown head gasket that any competent mechanic could diagnose. But Carlos's situation was more complex and representative of challenges that Jake had been observing among veteran customers for months. "Jake, I need this fixed, but I can't pay until next month," Carlos admitted, with the reluctant honesty of someone whose pride had been battered by circumstances beyond his control. "Lost my construction job last week because the foreman said my attitude problems were affecting the crew. Apparently, military leadership training doesn't translate to civilian appreciation." The conversation that followed revealed layers of frustration that Jake recognized from his own civilian transition employers, who viewed military experience as liability rather than asset disability accommodations that were legally required but practically resented, and the kind of institutional prejudice that turned decorated combat veterans into unemployable liabilities in communities that claimed to support those who'd served. Jake's response was immediate but thoughtful, his mechanical work continuing while his mind processed possibilities that had been developing subconsciously for months. "Carlos, how many veterans do you know who are struggling with employment? Not just unemployed, but underemployed, or working jobs that don't use their military skills?" The answer was depressing but not surprising. Carlos knew dozens of area veterans whose civilian careers were disappointments compared to their military service, whose potential was being wasted by employers who couldn't understand how military training translated to civilian value. The conversation continued while Jake diagnosed the truck's problems, but his real attention was focused on diagnosing the broader employment problems that were affecting his entire veteran community. The revelation came when Carlos mentioned his younger brother Miguel, an Army communications specialist whose electronics expertise was being wasted in a minimum wage warehouse job because civilian employers couldn't understand how military signal intelligence translated to commercial applications. The waste of talent was systematic and infuriating to Jake, whose own transition struggles had given him perspective on how civilian ignorance was creating unemployment among people whose skills exceeded most civilian workers' capabilities. What if we could create something that connected veteran skills with community needs? Jake asked his question, carrying the weight of someone whose mechanical mind was beginning to see patterns that could be fixed rather than endured. Not charity or government programs, but actual business opportunities that utilized military training while serving civilian customers who needed the expertise. The idea that began forming wasn't revolutionary in concept, but was radical in its simplicity. Used Jake's garage as an anchor point for a veteran hiring network that would identify skills, create opportunities, and demonstrate value in ways that government programs had failed to achieve. The approach would be business-focused rather than charity-based, with veterans earning respect through competence rather than receiving sympathy through victimhood. The first experiment was immediate and practical. Miguel Rodriguez would provide electronics diagnostic services for Jake's automotive repair customers, his military communications training, allowing him to troubleshoot modern vehicle computer systems that challenged traditional mechanical expertise. The partnership would expand Jake's service capabilities while providing Miguel with income that utilized his actual skills rather than wasting them in warehouse work. The success was immediate and measurable, with Miguel's electronics expertise solving problems that had frustrated Jake's mechanical approach, while demonstrating to customers that military training translated directly to civilian value. The collaboration proved that veteran employment wasn't charity case, but business opportunity that benefited everyone involved when properly structured and supported. The foundation was being laid for something that would grow far beyond automotive repair to encompass the kind of comprehensive veteran employment network that could transform entire communities while proving that military training was asset rather than liability when civilian employers were educated about its practical applications. The transformation of Jake's garage began subtly, but accelerated rapidly as word spread through veteran networks about opportunities that went beyond routine car repairs to encompass the kind of comprehensive services that military training had prepared them to provide. Within 3 months, the modest two-bay garage had evolved into something unprecedented, a veteran-owned business collective that served civilian customers while creating employment opportunities for service members whose skills had been underutilized by traditional job markets. Marine veteran Tony Castellanos brought welding and fabrication expertise that had been honed through 3 deployments, maintaining armored vehicles under combat conditions. His addition to Jake's operation allowed them to offer custom exhaust systems, trailer repairs, and metalworking services that expanded their customer base while providing Tony with income that matched his capabilities rather than settling for factory work that wasted his specialized skills. Air Force veteran Lisa Chen contributed avionics training that translated perfectly to modern vehicle electrical systems. Her diagnostic abilities exceeding what civilian automotive technicians could provide, while her systematic approach to problem-solving impressed customers who'd struggled with electrical gremlins that other shops couldn't identify. Her presence also challenged customer assumptions about veteran capabilities while demonstrating that military training transcended gender and service branch stereotypes. The business model that emerged was revolutionary. In its simplicity, veterans would provide specialized services under Jake's business umbrella, sharing overhead costs, while maintaining individual expertise areas that created comprehensive automotive and mechanical services. The approach allowed each veteran to operate as independent contractor, while benefiting from shared resources and collective reputation that individual startups couldn't achieve. Navy veteran Paul Henderson's submarine maintenance background proved invaluable for diesel engine repairs that had frustrated civilian mechanics. His experience with high-pressure systems and precision tolerances, making him the regional expert on heavy truck and agricultural equipment maintenance. His addition attracted commercial customers whose business had previously gone to larger shops that charged premium prices for expertise that Paul exceeded. The growth was organic but strategic, with each new veteran partner adding capabilities that expanded their service offerings while creating specialization niches that commanded higher prices and customer loyalty. Jake's role evolved from solo mechanic to business coordinator, whose military leadership experience proved essential for managing veteran entrepreneurs who understood discipline but needed guidance on civilian business practices. The community response was overwhelmingly positive, as residents discovered that veteran-owned services provided quality and reliability that corporate franchises couldn't match. The personal relationships that developed between veteran service providers and civilian customers created trust and loyalty that transformed routine business transactions into community investments. The escalation came when local media began covering the Veteran Business Collective as human interest story that revealed broader implications about veteran employment and community economic development. The coverage attracted attention from other veterans seeking opportunities while educating civilian employers about military training that they'd never understood or appreciated. But the growth also created challenges that tested Jake's leadership abilities and stretched resources beyond what the original garage could accommodate. The success that was solving veteran unemployment was creating new problems related to space equipment and the kind of business administration that military training hadn't addressed, but civilian success demanded. The expansion pressure intensified when word spread beyond Cedar Falls to surrounding communities where veterans recognized opportunities that didn't exist elsewhere. Jake found himself managing not just automotive services, but a comprehensive veteran employment network that was attracting participants from 3 counties while serving civilian customers whose demand exceeded their current capacity. The complexity increased when local government officials began investigating the business collective to ensure compliance with licensing requirements, tax obligations, and labor regulations that had been designed for traditional employment rather than the veteran partnership model that Jake had created. The bureaucratic scrutiny threatened to destroy the very innovation that was solving problems government programs had failed to address. The political implications became apparent when Jake realized that his success was inadvertently challenging established veteran service organizations, whose approaches emphasized assistance rather than empowerment, charity, rather than business opportunity. The effectiveness of his model was making other programs look ineffective, while his business-first approach conflicted with social service methodologies that prioritized process over results. The media attention was expanding beyond local coverage to include state and regional outlets that recognized the Veteran Business Collective as innovative approach to employment challenges that affected communities throughout the Rust Belt. The coverage was positive, but created pressure for Jake to expand faster than resources or management capabilities could support. The crisis was building as Jake's success created expectations and demands that exceeded what one disabled veteran could manage while maintaining the quality and personal attention that had made his approach effective. The program that had begun as simple automotive repair was becoming a comprehensive veteran employment network that required resources and expertise that Jake's military training hadn't provided. The escalation toward a breaking point was inevitable as growth outpaced management capabilities, while external pressures from government agencies, media attention, and veteran community expectations threatened to destroy the intimate personal approach that had made Jake's model successful in ways that larger programs had failed to achieve. The crisis exploded when Michigan Department of Labor investigators arrived at Jake's garage with citations for multiple violations of state employment regulations, their surprise inspection revealing that the veteran partnership model that had created dozens of jobs didn't conform to bureaucratic definitions of legal business operation. The investigators' aggressive approach and adversarial tone suggested that someone with influence had complained about Jake's success, turning innovation into potential criminal liability. Mr. Morrison, you're operating an unlicensed employment agency while misclassifying independent contractors who should be registered employees, announced Inspector Patricia Williams, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd built a career on enforcing regulations that often conflicted with practical solutions. These violations carry fines that could total over $50,000 plus criminal charges if we determine willful non-compliance. The accusations were technically accurate, but completely missed the point of what Jake had created: a veteran-owned business network that provided opportunities rather than employment partnerships, rather than payrolls, and entrepreneurship rather than traditional jobs. The regulatory framework that governed traditional employment couldn't accommodate the innovation that had made his model successful. Jake's response revealed both his military training and his growing frustration with bureaucratic obstacles that protected procedures rather than promoting results. Inspector Williams, every veteran working here is better off than they were before we started this program. They're earning money, using their skills, and serving our community. What law did we break by helping people succeed? But the inspector's duty was enforcement rather than evaluation, her job requiring compliance with regulations regardless of whether they achieved positive outcomes or prevented effective solutions. The citation process continued despite evidence that Jake's program was accomplishing what government services had failed to achieve: meaningful veteran employment that served community needs while creating economic growth. The devastating blow came when the investigation revealed that a competing auto repair chain had filed the complaint that triggered the state inspection, their corporate lawyers arguing that Jake's veteran network constituted unfair competition that violated established business practices. The attack was motivated by economic competition rather than regulatory concern, but the result was the same potential destruction of everything Jake had built. The legal costs alone would bankrupt the operation, while compliance with state employment regulations would eliminate the flexibility and personal relationships that had made the veteran partnership model successful. Jake faced the choice between abandoning his innovative approach or fighting a legal battle that could destroy both his business and his fellow veterans' livelihoods. The personal impact was equally devastating, as Jake watched veterans who'd found purpose and prosperity through his program face unemployment again because bureaucratic categories couldn't accommodate innovation that actually worked. Tony Castellanos' welding income had allowed him to move his family out of subsidized housing, while Lisa Chen's electronics expertise had enabled her to start saving for her daughter's college education. The state's enforcement action threatened to destroy lives that had been rebuilt through opportunity rather than charity. The darkest moment came when several veteran partners began discussing abandoning the program to protect Jake from further legal liability, their military honor preventing them from allowing their participation to destroy the person who'd created opportunities they'd never expected to find. The loyalty that had made them effective service members was now threatening to dissolve the very relationships that had created their success. Jake's own psychological breaking point was approaching as chronic pain from his combat injuries was exacerbated by stress that triggered symptoms he'd managed to control through meaningful work and community purpose. The program that had given his life meaning after military discharge was being destroyed by the same governmental systems that claimed to support veteran welfare. The media attention that had once celebrated Jake's innovation now focused on regulatory violations and bureaucratic failure with coverage, suggesting that his program had been operating illegally, despite evidence that it was accomplishing what legal programs had failed to achieve. The narrative was shifting from success story to cautionary tale about regulatory compliance and government oversight. The community's support that had sustained the program was being tested as customers faced pressure to choose between supporting local veterans and avoiding businesses under government investigation. Some customers remained loyal, but others chose safety over solidarity, reducing revenues that were already strained by legal expenses and compliance costs. The ultimate irony was bitter and complete. Jake's success in solving veteran employment problems had created problems that threatened to destroy both the solution and the people it had helped. The innovation that had proved veteran worth was being punished by systems that claimed to value veteran welfare while protecting established interests that benefited from veteran dependency rather than veteran success. The transformation began when Senator Patricia Hayes, chairman of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, and herself, a former Army logistics officer, arrived in Cedar Falls to investigate reports of an innovative veteran employment program that was being destroyed by bureaucratic overreach. Her visit wasn't coincidental. Veteran advocacy groups had brought Jake's case to her attention as an example of how government regulations were preventing the very solutions that veteran unemployment required. Mr. Morrison, I'm Senator Hayes. I understand you've created something remarkable here, and I want to understand why state regulators are trying to shut down a program that's actually working. The senator announced her military bearing immediately recognizable to Jake and the assembled veterans whose livelihoods hung in the balance. Sometimes Washington needs to learn from what's happening in places like Cedar Falls. The tour that followed was comprehensive and revealing, with Senator Hayes documenting how Jake's garage had evolved into a comprehensive veteran employment network that was accomplishing what federal programs had failed to achieve. Her questions were intelligent and informed, reflecting both military experience and legislative expertise that allowed her to understand both the innovation and the regulatory obstacles that threatened it. The breakthrough came when Senator Hayes recognized that Jake's model represented exactly the kind of veteran entrepreneurship that new federal legislation was designed to support the Veterans Economic Opportunity Act that was currently stalled in Congress due to opposition from established veteran service organizations that preferred charity-based approaches to employment challenges. Jake, what you've built here proves that veterans don't need handouts. They need opportunities that utilize their military training while serving civilian communities. Senator Hayes declared during a press conference held in the Garage Bay, where Tony Castellanos was welding a custom trailer for a local farmer. This is veteran empowerment in action, not veteran assistance that creates dependency. The federal intervention was swift and decisive, with Senator Hayes using her committee authority to pressure Michigan state officials to suspend enforcement actions while conducting comprehensive review of regulations that conflicted with veteran entrepreneurship initiatives. The political pressure was overwhelming, with media coverage shifting from regulatory violations to government failure to support veteran innovation. The resolution accelerated when the senator introduced emergency legislation that created federal legal framework for veteran business collectives specifically designed to protect programs like Jake's from state regulations that weren't designed to accommodate innovative employment models. The Veterans Innovation Protection Act would provide legal shelter for veteran entrepreneurs while encouraging similar programs nationwide. But the most meaningful intervention came from the community itself, with Cedar Falls residents and local businesses organizing support that demonstrated the value of Jake's program in ways that bureaucratic measurements couldn't capture. The testimonials were powerful, and personal elderly residents whose cars were affordable to maintain because of veteran expertise. Local businesses whose equipment stayed operational through veteran repairs, and families whose breadwinners had found dignity through work that utilized their military skills. This program saved my family, declared Carlos Rodriguez during a town hall meeting organized to support Jake's operation, not through welfare or charity, but through opportunity to use skills I learned in the Marines. Jake didn't just fix my truck, he fixed my ability to support my children. The business community's response was equally strong, with local corporations and agricultural operations providing contracts that demonstrated the economic value of veteran expertise while creating sustainable revenue streams that made the program self-supporting rather than dependent on external funding. The legal resolution came when Michigan's Attorney General, facing federal pressure and local political backlash, announced that state regulators would work with Jake to achieve compliance through accommodation rather than punishment. The compromise allowed the veteran partnership model to continue while establishing precedent for similar programs that were developing throughout the state. The expansion that followed was rapid and systematic, with Senator Hayes' office providing federal resources that allowed Jake's model to be replicated in veteran communities throughout the Midwest. The garage that had been threatened with closure became the flagship of a regional network that would eventually serve thousands of veterans while generating millions in economic activity. The transformation was personal as well as professional, with Jake's role evolving from local mechanic to national advocate whose story influenced federal policy while inspiring veteran entrepreneurship programs throughout the country. His garage remained his primary focus, but his influence extended to Washington, where his practical experience informed legislation that created opportunities for veteran-owned businesses. The recognition that followed included awards from veteran organizations, business associations, and government agencies that had initially opposed his approach, but now sought to claim credit for his success. The honors were meaningful, but the real validation came from the dozens of veterans whose lives had been transformed through opportunities that utilized their military training rather than discarding it as irrelevant to civilian success. The policy impact was substantial and lasting, with Jake's model influencing federal veteran employment programs that shifted from charity-based assistance to business-focused empowerment. The approach demonstrated that veterans needed opportunities rather than services, partnerships rather than programs, and respect rather than sympathy. The community transformation was equally significant, with Cedar Falls becoming a destination for veterans seeking entrepreneurial opportunities, while local businesses benefited from access to military-trained expertise that exceeded civilian alternatives. The town that had been losing population due to economic decline began attracting residents drawn by veteran employment opportunities and the economic growth they generated. The annual Jake Morrison Veterans Innovation Awards became a national celebration of veteran entrepreneurship, with the garage serving as both ceremony location and symbol of what was possible when military training was recognized as civilian asset rather than accommodation challenge. The event attracted visitors from throughout the country while inspiring similar programs that transformed veteran employment nationwide. 5 years later, Jake's Garage continued operating as both successful business and launching pad for veteran entrepreneurs who'd learned that military skills were valuable rather than obsolete when properly applied to civilian challenges. The man who'd worried that his combat injuries had made him useless had become proof that veteran expertise could transform entire communities when supported rather than regulated out of existence. The final scene was both vindication and beginning. Jake stood in his expanded facility, watching Marine veteran Sarah Thompson teaching electronics diagnostic techniques to high school students whose technical education now included military-style training standards. The garage that had been threatened with closure was now an accredited vocational training center that prepared the next generation while honoring the military service that had made such excellence possible. I fixed engines that wouldn't start and lives that had stopped. Jake reflected during the anniversary celebration of the program that had grown from automotive repair to comprehensive veteran empowerment. But the real fix was discovering that military training never becomes obsolete. It just needs civilian applications that recognize its value rather than treating it as liability. The audience, including Senator Hayes, dozens of veteran entrepreneurs and community members whose lives had been improved by veteran expertise, understood that they'd witnessed transformation of both individual lives and institutional approaches to veteran employment that proved military service was preparation for civilian contribution rather than obstacle to civilian success. The Jake Morrison model became the foundation for veteran employment transformation throughout American communities, establishing business-based approaches that utilize military training as economic asset rather than accommodation challenge. His success influenced federal policy and created frameworks for veteran entrepreneurship that generated billions in economic activity while serving civilian communities that benefited from military-trained expertise. The immediate consequences revolutionized Cedar Falls and surrounding communities, with the Veteran Business Network generating over $15 million in annual economic activity, while creating 200-plus jobs for veterans and civilian employees. The model attracted new businesses and residents to a region that had been experiencing population decline, demonstrating that veteran entrepreneurship could revitalize entire communities. The federal legislation that resulted from Jake's case created the Veterans Business Innovation Act, which provided legal protections and funding support for veteran-owned business collectives throughout the United States. The law influenced small business administration policies while establishing veteran preference programs that recognized military training as qualification rather than charity consideration. The educational impact transformed vocational training throughout the Midwest, with Jake's Garage becoming an accredited technical education center that taught military standard maintenance and repair techniques to civilian students. The program influenced apprenticeship standards while demonstrating that military training methods produced superior results compared to traditional vocational education approaches. The replication success was substantial and sustained, with over 400 communities establishing veteran business networks based on Jake's model within 5 years. The programs created thousands of veteran-owned businesses while generating economic activity that demonstrated veteran entrepreneurship as community development strategy, rather than social service program. The corporate response was equally transformative, with major manufacturers and contractors establishing partnerships with veteran business networks that provided specialized services while creating supply chain opportunities for veteran-owned companies. The relationships influenced defense contracting policies while proving that veteran businesses could compete effectively in civilian markets. The policy research that emerged from documenting Jake's success influenced academic understanding of veteran employment challenges and entrepreneurship solutions. Universities throughout the Midwest established veteran business incubators based on his model, while developing curricula that prepared business students to work with veteran entrepreneurs. The cultural impact transformed public understanding of veteran capabilities and community contributions with Jake's story, demonstrating that military training enhanced rather than limited civilian potential when properly supported and utilized. The narrative influenced veteran advocacy while encouraging communities to view veterans as assets rather than assistance recipients. The international influence extended to allied nations whose veteran services adopted similar business-focused approaches after recognizing the effectiveness of entrepreneurship over traditional employment assistance. The model influenced veteran programs in Canada, Australia, and NATO countries that faced similar challenges integrating military personnel into civilian economies. The annual Veterans Innovation Conference hosted in Cedar Falls became the premier event for veteran entrepreneurship, attracting participants from throughout North America, while generating millions in conference-related economic activity. The event demonstrated that veteran business development could create sustainable economic growth while honoring military service. The enduring message transformed fundamental assumptions about veteran employment. Military training was preparation for civilian excellence rather than accommodation challenge. Veteran entrepreneurship created community benefit rather than individual assistance. And the strongest economies were those that recognized and utilized the full potential of veteran expertise in civilian applications.